Okay, so you guys know by now, I like to dabble in my conspiracies, and today we're going to get into a new one about this seeming cover-up and a refusal to acknowledge what happened with the M1 iPad, what Apple did to the fans, and WWDC. So I'm going to explain, but before we get into it, of course, you know what to do. Hit the like button, subscribe, and click the bell so that you don't miss as we cover your favorite tech and video games. I'm Chris Grant Jr. It's the Grant and Geek Show. Also guys, stick around to the end of the video as I'm experimenting with a new way to get you guys' hands on some of this gear. Let me just say this before we start, and we'll get back to it at the end of the video. Who killed the iPod? Apple killed the iPod with the iPhone. Apple had a chance to kill the Mac. Yes, I know it's very dangerous. They could have done it with the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro would have pretty much killed every device, and they chose not to do it. Apple is not the same company that they were, and they don't take as many risks. They're not the same power to the people company that they once were. Okay, so today I'm going to be describing what Apple and the tech community has largely done post WWDC. It's what they did as an acronym: duality, indifference, and delusion. But before we get into that, let's talk about the buildup, right? So Apple has their M1 chips announced in MacBook Pros last year, and these chips blew everybody away in terms of single core performance being nearly best in class, like nothing even touching it, and then multi-core scores were like nothing we had ever seen on the Mac. These chips were so powerful, people were testing them, running 4K footage, multiple streams and video editing, doing graphic work, all with relative ease on the M1 and everything from the MacBook Pro to even the MacBook Air. Now this year they came to the iMac, but something else happened, something revolutionary. I'm just gonna say it. They have the M1 chip, the power that is in the M1 chip, in the iPad. And of course, I've watched Rene Ritchie's video saying that no, they didn't put a Mac chip in an iPad, they put an iPad chip in a Mac. But here's the difference. First of all, there's no such thing as a Mac chip or an iPad chip. They're all just chips, and given the right thermals and optimization, you can put any chip in any device. But secondly, and more importantly, it was about what we knew the M1 was capable of. So we had never seen Mac OS run on an Apple Silicon chip besides the developer Mac Mini that they had out last year for developers to get their apps ready for Apple Silicon. But in seeing what the M1 chip was capable of, in terms of running Premiere Pro, running DaVinci Resolve, running Logic, running Photoshop, all of these professional apps that ran on the Mac, we now knew that this chip inside the iPad could run Mac OS. And let me start by saying I'm in a different camp than those begging for Mac OS on the iPad. I don't think that that's a good idea. I like iPad OS. I like what it does in that operating system. It's well balanced and optimized for both touch and keyboard and mouse, and I don't think Mac is optimized for touch, even though it looks a little bit more similar to iOS. You know, too many small buttons, and you know, touch would be a mess on Mac OS. So I'm not part of that camp. The camp that I'm in is the camp that wants Mac OS professional applications available on the iPad, and this is because it has the chip that we know can run them. All that they would need to do is optimize the software for touch and make it run on iOS, and you're good to go. And we've already seen the inverse of this with iPhone and iPad apps running on the Mac. So it makes sense that with a little elbow grease, you'd be able to do the reverse and run Mac OS applications on the iPad. Okay, so now let's get to what it seems Apple and the tech community did, starting with duality. Every tech YouTuber was excited and seemingly welcomed the idea of pro apps coming to the iPad Pro. You couldn't ignore it. I mean, every tech YouTuber was talking about the possibility. There were so many signs. And I'm not just talking rumors, I'm talking from Apple themselves, including almost stat for stat the same specs in a MacBook Pro in the iPad: 16 gigs of RAM, up to 2 terabytes of storage, M1 chip, Thunderbolt, XDR display. In a lot of ways, the iPad Pro is better in terms of power than the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air, which all run M1. So we wanted this, we wanted it, we were excited for it, we welcomed the idea of more pro apps coming to the iPad, and this was pretty much across the board. But then on the other side, which was contradictory to that sentiment, we said constantly that we wouldn't know what to do with an iPad Pro if it did have all that power. You know, what would I use this for? Who is this device for? So much confusion about what it was for, yet mostly it was the pros that were pushing the iPad. And let me say something real quick. You know, for people who just casually buy the iPad Pro and say that, oh, it doesn't matter the specs that are in it. There wouldn't even be an iPad Pro without a certain small group of people who were in the minority pushing and pushing for bigger and better features in the iPad, pushing it to do things that it really should not be able to do and has no business doing. But Apple went along with it. They made the iPad Pro. They continued to put berserk bananas power in this thing. And then they put the cherry on top with an XDR display, again, the likes of which we hadn't seen in a display under $5,000, which was the 32-inch Apple display. And that's without the stand, because it's really like $6,000 with the stand. So that was really the whole duality of the situation leading up to WWDC. We welcomed Pro apps coming to the iPad. And at the same time, we were saying, we don't know who this device is for. What would we even do with this? Obviously, if they put the hardware and the software together for pros, it's for pros. It's called the iPad Pro, and I understand a lot of that is marketing since they have the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. They have the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. But, you know, Pro still has to mean something. And it had seemed that on the hardware side, they were delivering on that Pro name. But on the software side, it never materialized, and that's where we get to indifference. WWDC came and went this week, and people acted like it was no big deal, that the most revolutionary and probably the most anticipated thing of this event never happened. Now, of course, there was a ton of other things we didn't get. No iMac Pro, no 14 or 16-inch MacBook Pro, and all those things were great, and yes, hotly anticipated as well, but none of those things would have been revolutionary. They would have sped up the workflow for sure. M1X on a MacBook Pro, yeah, but nothing would have changed the way that we work as an iPad that now runs Logic, Resolve, Premiere Pro, Adobe Photoshop, all of those things would have done. This would have turned the iPad into the ultimate transformer of a device. And I had talked about this before. Never have we had a device that could be a tablet with the apps and even LTE like a smartphone, yet when you put it in a case, it could be a laptop, yet when you dock it with a USB-C dock, it could be a desktop, right? So your laptop, right now, the MacBook Pros, they can be a laptop or a desktop, that's it. Touch, it'll never be an iPhone, it'll never be an iPad, and it's too big for all that. Makes sense. And the desktop, obviously, is only a desktop. It can't be any of the other three. The iPhone can be like a smartphone, and as screens get bigger, maybe like a tablet, a mini tablet, but never really a laptop, and certainly not a desktop. So the iPad was right in the middle, and it was primed with hardware and software to be able to bring that full experience the way only Apple can do right now. So then this seemingly revolutionary product never materialized, and then people pretended not to care as if they were afraid to show their disapproval, or their disagreement, or their disbelief, quite frankly, in the fact that these things never materialized despite the hardware being that perfect precursor to more software. And what I will say is, it seems a little odd that all of these companies, right? Imagine all the Pro companies, not even including the Apple ones. So your Pixelmator, your Blackmagic Design that makes DaVinci Resolve, and several other professional apps, right? You mean to tell me that despite the M1 chip coming to iPad, and with a lot of these developers knowing of this, especially the big companies knowing of this in advance, as they're often sworn to secrecy, and sometimes when it's released, they have some third-party developers come in and show off what the M1 could do in an iPad. None of them thought to develop software for the iPad, and we've known that the iPad has been OP, the iPad Pro has been OP for a while, since really the third and fourth generation. It's done everything that we could ask it to do and then some. So those things weren't in the works this whole time, and they weren't ready to go at WWDC. Now, I will say maybe these things are still coming. Maybe they might be ready by the fall or early next year at maybe Apple's next spring event. I just find it very hard to believe that none of these developers even thought to try to bring a Pro app to the iPad Pro with all of its crazy horsepower. They were all just quiet, a little too quiet, which leads me to think maybe this is all something that they've agreed to not do in order to keep people relying on the MacBook and to have the iPad Pro never break out as its own truly standalone device. And for many people it is. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of different pro workflows. I've seen a lot of comments saying, listen, the only pros are not just video editors and stuff like that. And honestly, for a lot of different workflows, the iPad is it. Like, it's all that you need, period. I'm talking about for that next level for content creators. There's still work to be done on the front of the iPad Pro. Okay, so now let's get to the delusion part. So we went through the duality of believing two contradictory things. We went to the indifference where they were pretending that they didn't care that this thing never happened. And now we're getting to the delusion where a lot of tech YouTubers are pretending that this never happened. Like they never expected the iPad Pro to get pro features. You can go back and watch their videos. They talked about it, and they talked about how exciting that would be, while at the same time saying, you know, we don't know who this would be for. They're acting as if, oh, Apple never promised anything. And I've gotten this comment a lot, but let me just respond to it. It's not that Apple promised it. In fact, Apple never promises anything. Are we acting now like everything that we've ever predicted that's come to light has been because Apple promised it? Of course not. You try and look at the patterns that Apple is establishing with these products, and you predict where they might go in the future. And when you add all the stats that I just mentioned that can match a MacBook Pro that people are using for professional work. Heck, some people are even using the MacBook Air for professional work, and the MacBook Air doesn't have the Pro name, so you could argue it's not really meant for pros. But they still put everything you would need for the most part besides a fan, and some people have even modded their MacBook Airs to get cooler temperatures so they can, you know, kick up to those higher M1 numbers. So certainly if an M1 MacBook Air can do all the things pretty much that an M1 MacBook Pro could do, why wouldn't you allow an M1 iPad Pro to do all the things that a Pro device should be able to do? And again, this comes down to software. Just enable us to do it. Now, there are a ton of changes and features coming to LumaFusion, and I'm excited to try those out, as well as iPad OS 15. I have the iPad Air 4 right now, and on the way is the third generation 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which I will probably be using as my companion device to my Mac Mini right now. I'll also be doing a comparison if you were also disappointed by the M1 iPad Pro and you're looking to downgrade, I guess. I'll be saying which one of those I think is the better option, the iPad Air 4 or the third/fourth generation iPad Pro that is 12.9-inch. So yes, duality, indifference, and delusion. Those are the three things that I don't seem to understand in the tech community. Nobody wants to show their teeth. Nobody wants to show that they're upset with that revolutionary product not coming to light. Apple is the power to the people type of company. They've been that way for a long time, taking advanced technology that costs lots and lots and bringing it down to the common folk. We saw the 32-inch mini LED XDR display, right? And that was basically probably the best display ever made to that point in terms of technology. But what did they do? $5,000–6,000 is a fair price to ask for such a gorgeous display. But what did they do? They brought it down even further. And an arguably better technology in the M1 iPad Pro's display than in the mini LED 32-inch because of dimming zones and the amount that they crammed into it. So they took arguably better technology and brought it down to a fifth of its price, allowing more people access to that experience. As I've said many times, I still believe in iPad and I still believe in iPad Pro and its potential. But right now, and I'll say it again, Apple does not believe in the iPad Pro. They don't believe in its ability to completely revolutionize the industry. Yes, the iPad Pro would kill the Mac. Yes, the iPad Pro would kill pretty much every device in the same way that the iPhone killed the iPod. Who did that? Apple. Apple killed the iPod. Yeah, they're not taking the same risks. They're not revolutionizing industries. They're not killing off products and taking the world by storm. They're holding on so hard to their MacBook sales that they don't realize that if they did what they could do with the iPad Pro, they would take over market share like they've never had. Also, guys, don't forget to check out my Mercari page, the new official store of the Granted Geek Show. You can get your hands on some of the gear that I unbox right there in the show. So, of course, the link will be down in the description below. Check it out. Anyway, guys, let me know, of course, what you think. Dialogue and discourse being opened up down in the comment section below. So I'll be chatting it up with you guys all week, as always. Be sure, once again, to hit the subscribe button if you like videos like this. And if you like this video, and click the bell, guys, of course, so you get a notification on your phone when I drop new videos. Thanks, guys, so much for watching. As always, I'm Chris Grant Jr. It's the Granted Geek Show.